Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's episode where we talk about 8 life areas to declutter, to calm chaos and overwhelm, and to release emotional baggage. In the beginning of today's episode, I like to take you with me into the controversial opinion if trauma is actually responsible for a lot of our clutter in our life. After that, I want to in-depth explore all of those 8 areas in detail and of course, for all of the areas, come up with solutions to declutter. Ready to go into this topic together? Here we go. And if you're new here on the channel, my name is Robert and I'm not a healthcare professional myself, but instead I share a client's perspective here on this channel. Let's start with the very controversial question and discussion: are trauma and declutter actually linked? And is trauma actually the cause for a lot of clutter in our lives? There are several studies on that topic that investigate if there is a link. For example, this one about hoarding and trauma. And the study tries to identify in detail how are those tendencies to hoard things, to collect things that cause clutter in the second place, are linked to adverse childhood experiences, to neglect, abuse, all these kind of things. And the paper here shows that trauma exposure, for example, was associated with more severe problems with acquisition in hoarding. Trauma exposure was also associated with stronger hoarding-related beliefs, especially emotional attachment to possessions. We'll go into that later as well. And the association between trauma exposure and difficulty discarding was stronger among individuals with a younger age of onset of hoarding behaviors. So, according to science, there is definitely a link here between trauma and hoarding or clutter. The question still is if clutter is causing the trauma or if trauma is causing the clutter, and therefore clutter is just another symptom of CPTSD. I personally, and I've seen that on YouTube as well, believe that clutter is more another symptom of complex trauma as well. Clutter also intensifies other symptoms of complex trauma like anxiety, overwhelm, depression, chaos, and also baggage feeling in our lives. So all of this overwhelm, the difficulties, the dysregulated emotions within us are definitely linked and partly caused or intensified by clutter and hoarding behaviors. I try to create this devil cycle as a visualization to make that more visual for us. And this is the cycle that I came up with. So usually we see trauma, so having a messy past, having a toxic family environment, maybe having alcoholics as parents, dysregulated parents, parents who cannot self-soothe, who cannot control their emotions, constantly neglect the child's needs, maybe manipulated the child, just living in a really messy past. This is the first station here in our cycle. From there on, in especially highly sensitive children and people who may also be neurodivergent, but definitely in a ton of children who experienced such childhoods, you will see trauma arising. So a wound that is left out of this messy childhood, out of this neglect, this manipulation, abuse, the instability, the ambivalence in the childhood. That's causing the trauma here. And a symptom of trauma is definitely anxiety, and I've read that quite often on YouTube as well. There is a link between anxiety and clutter or hoarding behaviors. So therefore anxiety is causing clutter, and more clutter is causing even more anxiety, is causing the overwhelm, the chaos, or to simplify that, this tensioned and dysregulated state within the nervous system. When we have such a difficult, chaotic, cluttery life, we also create a really messy present. And as we live in a messy present as individuals with early wounding and trauma, that intensifies the trauma we already have, and the cycle begins from the beginning again, begins to repeat itself. Decluttering, just tidying things up, in all of the areas of our lives, we'll go into that in a bit, that's definitely a really powerful re-regulation exercise. But the issue here is that in order to declutter our lives, we often stand in front of a huge mountain of things that we can declutter. And this mountain already is often overwhelming to us. So in order to declutter all of our life areas, we often need to deal with a lot of dysregulation symptoms first, in order to just get to the point where we feel that inner power to declutter and start decluttering our lives. So just think about when you maybe have a basement or you have a garage or a storage room, and you just go to this place, to this basement room. For me, it's a basement room in my apartment. And I will put a picture here how my basement at the moment looks like. That's clutter down there, because everything that I don't need in my flat, I just somehow push in there, right? Maybe you can relate to that. And the problem is, if I go down there, opening that door, pushing another chair in, or something that I just collected somewhere, and then it's out of my mind, but it's somewhere in that basement. And just starting there can be already overwhelming if you have CPTSD. So often it's a lack of power that is the core issue here to start decluttering in the first place as someone with CPTSD. But decluttering, if you once manage to start, it can have a huge impact on your mental health and definitely helps to regulate. I can tell you one of my own stories. This happened this year to me, which helped me to gain a lot more clarity and brought back space into my head. And it was when I came back, I did a really long journey and a lot of traveling this year. Went to Central America for a couple of weeks, and I was living there with my partner in a really huge home. So we had bright light, pretty high ceiling and walls, and it was pretty tidied up there. And when I came back to Germany, to the place where I'm currently living, to my apartment, I felt so squeezed in the walls here. Everything is so full. Even if it's tidied up somehow, it's still not a lot of space in my flat. So I felt kind of overwhelmed by the situation, and there was a lot of pressure coming from my place. So I decided to tidy things up, to declutter my place, and to just spend a whole day just going through all the furnitures, all the wardrobes, which things do I need, which things don't I need. And usually for me, and I know it's quite different maybe for you, but for me, this brings a lot of release. So when I do this, I feel motivated to declutter, and I already get the dopamine spike in advance to know that my place will look so much tidier afterwards. So I did it, and I can show you a picture right now of how much stuff I just put in the bin into the trash afterwards. I just sent this to my dad and was texting him, "Dad, I didn't know that I could store so many packages, empty trash in my furniture. How is it even possible?" So I spent this whole day just decluttering furniture, some of the wardrobes that I have, putting some clothes away, and preparing some stuff as well to sell that on eBay, or if you live in the US, for example, on Craigslist. And after doing that, it truly brought me a lot more headspace up here, so much more order, clarity, and stability. Honestly, I felt like I just detached some part of myself and put that into the trash. So decluttering our household, our flat, our apartment, garage, basement, whatever, that's just one part of the equation. And there are multiple forms of things that we can declutter, like mental, emotional, relationship clutter as well. And I'd like to explore now with you each of those things one by one, starting with the smallest things to declutter, that's the household, by the way, ending with the biggest baggage that we have usually. And often, thing is, we are not even aware of all of those open tabs that we have in our minds. But let's explore those one by one. So this is a visualization of how the brain could look like if it's completely decluttered. So we have all of those different areas that we now deep dive into, starting with the first one, which is the household clutter that I already announced before. For me, again, I had a ton of old packaging, old boxes, and I just put them in the bin in the end. But it could also be that you have a garage or your basement full of stuff. And a problem here is often for people with CPTSD that decluttering those kind of things is often already overwhelming. And that's because the process of deciding, completely making decisions all the time, do I need this kind of thing still, or is it something that I could just throw in the trash bin? And if you decided on things that you maybe don't need anymore, like clothes, like maybe an old bicycle, some tools you have laying around, do I need to sell those kind of things? Are they still worth something? Or is it something that I really could trash? And when you decide on that you have to sell those things because you want to make some money out of it, I know it's quite a process. So you need to photograph those, you need to write a description, could use AI these days. Then you need to upload those kind of things to eBay or Craigslist, set a radius, wait for people to text you, clean those things up maybe right before someone would buy it. So it's a whole process to sell those kind of things. And I know that can be quite overwhelming. So another opportunity is to donate those kind of things. Or what I see quite often in the neighborhood, and I also did that a couple of days ago with an old table that I had in my basement, because I'm also currently planning to move. So I'm also putting out a lot of stuff. And I just put that old table on the street. And people usually, if they come by the sidewalk, some people might take those kind of things. Often, those are maybe also people like us. And maybe you know this feeling as well. It's so difficult to declutter even our household because many of us are used to hoard things. We like to collect things, maybe even because in early childhood we learned that we need to hoard things in order to survive. Maybe you grew up poor, maybe you didn't have a lot of stuff. So now you're used to collect and hoard everything. And if there's something out for free, better take it than leave it. Then there's also the topic of the kitchen, of hoarding food. There were some people in the pandemic who hoarded a lot of cans, a lot of food. Some people might still have it up to this day, some of the cans, maybe some of the toilet paper as well. But that's another indicator. If you in early childhood always had the feeling that you don't have enough food in the fridge, of course you try to hoard food these days. And maybe you need a good reminder that you probably now have more stability, hopefully have more financial resources to buy the food instead of hoarding it constantly. So whenever you need to, you can go to the supermarket, buy the food. But it's definitely understandable if you still hoard food in the kitchen, if you experienced that as a child and never had enough. Let's dive into the next area. That's a bit bigger already. And we are talking about time and capacity clutter. What do I mean by that? I mean by that maybe you know that sometimes, or maybe even often, you might have the feeling that you don't have enough time. Do you have that regularly? I have that so many days. And this is definitely something that keeps bothering us. How can we declutter time and capacity clutter here? So first of all, let's understand or try to figure out, if you think about your day, where do you invest a lot of your time? And where does a lot of your capacity go to? How many hours are you actually working? Are you working 5 hours, 8 hours, maybe 10 hours, maybe non-hours? How much time do you spend in those breaks where you're not working on social media? just reading something or scrolling through something, maybe even reading the newspaper or a magazine in between, just because you feel bored or you feel like you need the next dopamine hit. This is something where you you don't have to do anything, but you could invest your time a bit more wisely. And this is also a reminder for myself, because I do this as well. And yesterday, for example, I tried to, in my work breaks, not spend the time on social media or YouTube. I don't have social media apps on my phone anyway, but when I'm in my break, I usually go on YouTube and watch something while I'm eating. And believe it or not, this is definitely stealing some of my capacity. Also, how much white time do you have? And by white time, I mean the time you spend just doing nothing, just having time to do whatever could do, sitting in a chair, just staring at the wall, whatever, going for a walk. You could do all those things, but often we again fill also this white time with social media, with YouTube, Netflix, videos or video games, just doing something to get more of the dopamine rolling. This is also something helps a lot to declutter and get aware where you and how you spend your time and how much capacity you actually have left in the end of the day. Let's go to decluttering number 3, and we're talking about career clutter here. Usually I have this once a year where I feel completely overwhelmed and also a bit burned out. And then I look in my calendar, and usually I see that I already put way more on my plate than I could handle. And I'm a self-employed person, so maybe you're in a lucky position of being an employee, and hopefully your boss is not loading up your plate. So I hope you have like a really regulated week schedule. But for me as a self-employed, I could load up more and more and more and more stuff on my plate until I explode or burn out. So whenever I know, and this happened to me like 2 years, I think this year was quite fine. The past month at least, I didn't have that anymore because now I'm wiser. But usually when I have this feeling I'm overwhelmed, it's too much, I can't handle anything anymore, I look at my calendar and I see, damn, I spent so much time trying to figure out how I could do more that I have too much on the plate. So I start to cut out things from my calendar and try to figure out where are the things that I could maybe outsource to someone else, or the things that I don't need to do at all. Because there's always prioritization. And most of us unconsciously, especially if you have trauma, if you have ADHD or are a really sensitive person, we unconsciously have the feeling that everything we do or have to do is equally important. And that's not the truth. The truth is that there are some things that are more importantly to do, other things that are less importantly to do. And if you are self-employed, those things are usually, which are most important, the things that also are tied to the money that you earn. So the money-making activities are usually the most important, so you prioritize these. Everything else, ask yourself, can I cut that out? If you have too much on your plate as an employee in terms of your career life, then it could be an indicator that you're somehow maybe an overfunctioner, you're maybe a yes-sayer, maybe a people pleaser, and you have problems setting boundaries. Because when you have like a 40-hour work week, it's not okay to have 50 hours or 60 hours of work on your plate. So you somehow have to communicate that. And it's really important to set rigid boundaries here and also declutter your calendar. A good sign that it's time to declutter your calendar is, as I said, if you feel burnout, if you feel constantly dysregulated, and also if you have not enough time for regulating activities, like spending time with your family, with your friends, like reading, doing yoga, doing sports, or doing healing tasks. If you don't have that, it's definitely time to rethink your career declutter behaviors. And if you think career declutter was also a big one, wait to the next one, which is also closely tied to the career, which is financial clutter. When we talk about financial clutter, for some people, there are definitely chronic gut pains already happening. For other people, financial problems are not such a big deal, and it's definitely also depending on how you grew up. If you grew up poor, if you grew up never having enough to eat, never having enough money, then that might be in part of your life that it's causing clutter and that's causing chaos in your mind. If you grew up always having enough money, probably not such a big deal for you. Open tasks or open tabs in your mind when it comes to financial stuff are often those kind of things where you feel, okay, I need to maybe have open bills to pay. I have debt somewhere that I have to pay. So a behavior that I install in my life is to always pay everything as soon as possible. So whenever I get a bill, I try to pay it as soon as possible. Because if I don't pay it, I somehow feel I'm in debt, or I feel like being guilty in a way. It's still another tab opening in my head. And this is why it's so important to directly focus on paying things up front if that's possible for you. If that's not possible for you to pay everything that you need to pay as soon as possible, then maybe you have like an issue, or there is like a topic coming out of your childhood with money, with financial stuff. So it could be worth it to try to identify which beliefs do you have around money, and do you have the ability already, the mindset to earn enough money to pay all the things that you need to pay. Or you just buy too much, could also be an option. If you buy too much, like buying stuff to compensate, buying stuff to fill a hole within yourself, that could also be something that's happening to you as another tab within your mind. So another step to declutter, definitely. Number 5 is physical health. And physical health is quite a difficult one, because for some of us, physical health problems, we are kind of responsible for them because we cause them by our own behavior. But there are also physical health problems that might happen to you. You don't know really why. Some people, and that's really sad, maybe are super fit, do a lot of sports, get cancer at 21. It's just tough. I think there is like probably nothing this person could do to improve their physical health to that point in their lives. But if you are 60, 70 years old, you have a super high blood pressure because you had a poor nutrition the past 40 years, then I think you take a lot of the responsibility for getting into that physical health state. So there are things that you can do to improve that. There are things to reduce your blood sugar levels, to reduce your high blood pressure. And I studied nutritional and food sciences. So there are definitely correlations between physical health issues and how we eat, the things we take into our body, and how much sports and movement we do within the day. So it's really important to, if that's an issue for you and you want to declutter that, to focus on which simple things can I maybe change within my life, my health life, my nutrition, my movement behaviors, in order to close some of these tabs and to feel better, to make the body in a way more fit and more resilient as well. So it's not just around the mind, it's not just mental health that we are talking about here, but also physical health. A thing that is also tied to that are eating disorders. Eating disorders are a try of our body-mind system to regain control through controlling what you eat. So for example, eating less to get extremely skinny, or eating a lot, building muscle to become like a really strong bodybuilder person. Those kind of things, everything that is related to your physical health, to your body, can definitely bother us. And if we don't take care of our bodies, if we constantly accumulate this clutter within our physical health, it's definitely something that's causing more overwhelm in our lives. And this is also true if someone close to you, maybe a relative, is having health issues. You suffer with them because you care for them, of course. So taking care of our own body is also something that helps the relatives around us because they care for our health as well. And the less you care for your physical health, the more open tabs with problems and overwhelm occur in your head, unfortunately. Now we're getting to the really intense clutterings, because physical health is definitely one of them. But what's even more bothering us and creating a ton of overwhelm and emotional baggage is relationship clutter. And relationship clutter, I don't just mean intimate relationships. Usually, of course, we have the biggest clutter there. If we have clutter, if we have drama, emotional difficulties. But I also mean relationships, maybe superficial ones, with your neighbor, with the postman, with your landlord, with your boss, coworker, partner, that's intimate again, with your mom or dad, whoever. When you have a relationship and you maybe have a conflict with some of those people or just one person, this is an open tab in your head. And when let's say you have like conflict with your landlord or with your neighbor, whenever you come home, you already feel a bit more tensioned because you know that there's someone close who you have a conflict with. And maybe a solution for that is simply to just be brave and go to this person, have like a nice conversation, try to apologize maybe if that's necessary. And if that's not possible, because there are those situations and relationships in life where we cannot really resolve the conflict, or there's repeating conflict, or for some reason I also have that in my family, not with me, but I see that happening in my family with some people, that they just don't like each other somehow. And from my experience, the only solution then is to remove those people from your life. Sometimes it's not entirely possible, as I said, but it's still difficult when you see this person regularly and you somehow feel that there is like a subconscious conflict going on. In the end, I think for decluttering relationship life, of course, the rule for intimate relationships is to, whenever a conflict comes up, to always resolve that. This is something that my dad already told me. Whenever there is something with your partner, try to resolve that as quick as possible, because you want stability in your relationship and you don't want to have any subconscious processes, conflicts going on. You want to have clarity in your relationship, and you want to be fair and there for your partner, and you also have a partner who's been fair and is there for you if you need them. There's also this general rule of thumb here, which is that if you have relationships, you don't need a ton of those. But it's better to focus on just a few good people instead of having hundreds of people you have superficial relationships with, where you have potential conflicts. You don't need that, especially not if you're someone with early trauma or if you're a really sensitive person. Now it's time for one of the biggest clutters, which is emotional clutter. Yes, there are a couple of different types here of emotional clutter. As we saw before in the study, how is hoarding related to trauma? There's definitely an association between trauma exposure and possessions, the emotional attachment to possessions. There is another study here that investigated a similar subject, and they also find the same thing. They found that the number of events involving loss or deprivation occurring before hoarding was related to increased emotional attachment to possessions, whereas events happening after the onset of hoarding were related to increased concerns about memory as drivers of hoarding symptoms. So, we have emotional attachment to possessions. That's the first part of emotional clutter here. And this is such a tiny thing that we are often not aware of. But we tie different stories, different emotions and memories to specific objects in our lives. Maybe you have this just one postcard that a really good friend sent to you before he died. Of course you can keep that, but do you need to keep 100 postcards of him that he sent during his whole life? Or you maybe have some old clothes within your basement that you wear when you have been 25 years old and you maybe had a really heavy party phase in your life and had a really good time. Of course, you can keep those kind of clothes, but do you really need those types of clothes these days? And this is some question that you can ask for maybe everything that you possess. And a thing here is that, and I learned that quite often in my life, that the more possessions you have, the more possessed you feel. So possessions possess you. And this is something that's even intensified if you have experienced early trauma and have the feeling that, you're emotionally attached more than other people to specific things that you possess. So I think the more you are emotionally attached to the furniture, to the clothing, to whatever you have in your household, in your life, the more difficult it is to declutter those kind of things. And then there's also another huge part of emotional cluttering in our lives. And those other things are things that we experienced maybe years ago that still bother us somehow, that still trigger us somehow. And I want to make that point clear by telling you a story of a friend of my dad, because this year my dad celebrated his birthday within the garden. So it was a lukewarm summer day. You could hear the birds singing and the bugs making noises in the garden, and there were just those men, so him and his friends, sitting in the middle of the night in the garden, and they talk about an emotional story of one of his friends that happened literally 40 years ago. And the story was that 40 years ago, his friend was in love with a woman, and today you would say they had like a really good time for a couple of dates, maybe weeks or months, and then she ghosted him. And a couple years later, he met his wife and he married, so different woman, of course. And then he lived his life with his wife. And 40 years later, so this year, he met this woman that ghosted him 40 years ago on a funeral. And on that funeral, he got triggered so hard that his whole life emotionally kind of fell apart, because he got reminded to the pain he experienced 40 years ago that he never truly processed. And this emotional baggage, this emotional clutter that he was taking on his shoulders for 40 years now makes him feel depressed, and also makes his marriage difficult, because his wife thinks, what is wrong with you? This happened like 40 years ago. But the thing is that probably this woman already 40 years ago triggered something in him that made him cling to her so crazily. And that something is a thing that he never worked through entirely. There's probably also, and I don't know him personally, but there's probably also some anxious attachment here involved, or some fearful avoidant attachment style. But this is emotional baggage. This is the emotional clutter that we have still in our minds. And I think it's important to take the time, once in our lives at least, and try to work through those kind of emotional baggages that we carry around. Because if you don't do that, and I know that many of the more wise people of the further generations, or of the past generations, they never really took the time to work through and reflect on these kind of topics in their lives. But it's definitely something that's worth doing. We also have, according to whatever happened in our childhood, a ton of, let's say, unfavorable beliefs that we constantly tell ourselves. That's another part of emotional cluttering here. If you grew up knowing that you're always wrong, that no one wanted you, or that you have been the black sheep in the family, that you maybe always have the poor person in school or the overweight person at work, those are unfavorable beliefs, so stories in your mind that you constantly tell yourself. So you have like a part of you that is self-sabotaging you into those stories and dragging you back in, causing a lot of overwhelm, a lot of clutter in your life. And it's definitely, again, worth it to question those unfavorable beliefs and try to get back to the true inner sense of self within you. And, oh, by the way, we have like a full course on our community platform on that. So if you want to become a member, you can go to understandable.net, start your free 7-day trial here, and then you can access our courses. So we have a full course on reconnecting with our sense of self. And this is like the foundation to get back to that understanding. So developing a sense of self, understanding your sense of self, and also, of course, we have skills and tools for re-regulation. So coming back to regulated state and a calm nervous system. And this is the first step in breaking through those stories that we tell ourselves, to recognize and create awareness for who we are truly within us and which are stories that we tell ourselves. And last but not least, the most important and biggest clutter that many of us deal with in our lives without being conscious and aware of it is mental clutter. And mental clutter is like the feeling that you have a super crowded space within your head, that it's constantly overloaded, that you need more space somehow in your head, maybe have too many topics on the plate in general. And I don't just talk about work topics, I also talk about things that you think that you have to do, or memories, reminders, thoughts that you have in your head throughout the day, for example. And there are a couple strategies to work through mental clutter in general. First of all, what I recommend, and I do that myself, use the reminders app of your phone. Whenever you have a thought and you feel like, too many thoughts, too many things that I need to do, write that thought down within a reminder note in your phone. If it's truly important, then you will see that it's so good to write that down, because then you get reminded when you have time, maybe in a week, or you already schedule this reminder into 2 weeks or in 3 weeks, because you realize while writing it down that it's not so important anymore. And then maybe you can forget about it. But if you have maybe experiences or learnings, I have that sometimes during the day, I think, oh my gosh, I have something, I need to write that down. What do I do? When I'm around and I go through the city, for example, I take out my phone and write that down in my phone. Just to write that down already calms the mind. Another option is, of course, using the journal. Just take your journal, if you have one. Sometimes I still journal and I write down whatever comes to my mind, just that it's in here. If it's written down, it's calmed down. This is like what I experienced. Also, a really great app that you can use is Headspace for meditation. I used Headspace during university a couple years ago already, but it's still like one of the best apps for meditating and creating more headspace. Meditating in general is something that you could do. I don't do that at the moment, but what I do is I try to focus from time to time within the day more on my body. So I kind of meditate in my body and try to focus more on specific feelings that arise during the day. And then there's also the Notes app in your phone. If you have something that you constantly want to remind yourself, you can also use the Notes app. For example, I go through like a tiny reminder list, so it's something different than just a reminder app where you can like send a reminder to your home screen, for example, if you, I need to buy carrots, so you send a carrot reminder. I don't talk about this right now. I talk about maybe to remind yourself to ground yourself from time to time. I have this in my Notes app. So I read this in the morning, in the evening, to first of all ground myself, to get back to myself, connect with myself. And this is also something that we have in our classroom. We have a full class on building an authentic self. And this is also the class that I recommend if you want to get more in contact with yourself. Learning reparenting and self-containment, definitely huge skills when it comes to calming down and getting back into connection with yourself, trying to hold the emotional states within yourself. If you want to join, again, understandable.net, you can start a 7-day free trial here on the website. And last but not least, if you want to calm mental clutter in general, you can of course also use our re-regulation resources workbook, which is available on our website for free. Just go to understandable.net/book, and here you can download a full free re-regulation resources workbook. We have a ton of exercises, journaling exercises, especially helpful for mental declutter, to just calm your thoughts, and also tools and exercises and skills that you can do to calm your body, which first of all helps you to regulate back in. After hearing those 8 life areas now, do you think that clutter is caused by early trauma? And which of those areas do you want to declutter first within your life? If you want to share that, definitely do so in the comments below. If you want to support the podcast, the project, definitely check out our website, understandable.net, subscribe to the channel and the podcast. And I'm here to speak to you next Sunday for a brand new episode on the channel. Have a great, fantastic, and hopefully decluttered day.